Chloe stared at her laptop screen for the 10th time that night, rereading the same ad that had mysteriously appeared in her university email. Seeking female participant for long-term psychological experiment. Compensation, $1 million. Duration, 6 months. Requirements: psychology student, no close family, full availability. The letters seemed to glow against the black background of her small apartment in Philadelphia, where unpaid bills were stacked on the kitchen table, constant reminders of her reality. At 23, Chloe had lost her parents in a car accident 3 years prior, leaving her not only an orphan but also burdened with medical and funeral debts. She worked part-time at a Starbucks near campus while finishing her clinical psychology thesis, but the money was never enough. Her classmates talked about their post-graduation plans: grad school abroad, internships at top firms, opportunities that sounded like fairy tales to her. And if you've ever felt like life presents you with opportunities that seem too good to be true, be sure to hit that subscribe button, because this channel has many more stories like this that will captivate you. The email had no identifiable sender, just a corporate address. Advanced Experiments Neuroimaging Comedy. When she tried to research the company, she found a minimalist website with basic information about advanced neuroscientific research, but no specific details. The academic references mentioned existed, but when she tried to contact them, secretaries told her they couldn't provide information about ongoing projects. Curiosity and financial desperation led her to reply to the email. 2 hours later, she received a call from a professional female voice who identified herself as Dr. Hernandez, the project coordinator. Ms. Miller, we have reviewed your academic profile and believe you would be an ideal candidate for our experiment. Could you meet us tomorrow at 3 p.m. at our offices? She provided an address in the most exclusive financial district in downtown Chicago. The next day, Chloe wore her best outfit, the only one she owned, a second-hand suit bought for university presentations, and took the L train downtown. The building was impressive, a 30-story glass tower with the Neural Tech Solutions logo etched in golden letters in the lobby. The elevator took her to the 25th floor, where a receptionist directed her to a conference room with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. Dr. Hernandez turned out to be a woman in her 40s, elegantly dressed with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Chloe, thanks for coming. I know you must have a lot of questions about the project. On the table were a 50-page contract and a golden pen. Before I explain the details, I need you to understand that everything we discuss here is protected by strict confidentiality agreements. The experiment, the doctor continued, involves living for 6 months with one of our lead researchers in a controlled environment. Your role will be to participate in daily behavioral observation sessions and complete regular psychological evaluations. It is essentially an anthropological study of human interaction in isolated settings. It seemed too simple to justify that amount of money, but the doctor anticipated her doubts. The compensation is high because we require exclusive dedication and total confidentiality. You will not be able to have contact with the outside world during the experimental period. Chloe felt a chill. Completely isolated? What if there's an emergency? The doctor smiled again. We will have 24-hour medical supervision and emergency communication available. But for the experiment to be valid, we need the environment to be completely controlled. Think of it as a paid vacation where your only job is to be yourself. The contract specified that she would receive $500,000 upon signing and another $500,000 upon successfully completing the 6 months. It also included a clause that allowed her to withdraw at any time during the first 2 weeks, keeping the first $500,000 if she decided to continue after that period. The fine print mentioned possible adjustments to the experimental protocol as the study evolves, and continuous psychological supervision to ensure participant well-being. 3 days later, Chloe found herself in the back seat of a black Mercedes, traveling on a winding road toward the outskirts of Chicago. The driver, a silent man in his 50s, had picked up her few belongings from her apartment that morning without saying more than, "Good morning, ma'am." The urban landscape gradually gave way to rolling green hills and elegant estates until they finally stopped in front of wrought iron gates that opened automatically. The mansion that appeared before her was breathtaking, a 2-story Spanish colonial structure, painted immaculate white, with red tile roofs and perfectly manicured gardens that stretched toward an artificial lake. Water fountains created a soothing sound that contrasted with the nerves Chloe felt in her stomach. It was the kind of place she had only ever seen in her dreams, and now it would be her home for 6 months. At the main entrance, a man was waiting who immediately captured her full attention. Tall, with an athletic build, slightly disheveled brown hair, and intense green eyes that seemed to study her with scientific curiosity. He was wearing dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, casual but elegant. His smile was genuine, unlike Dr. Hernandez's artificial grin. "Hi, Chloe. I'm Ethan Miller. Welcome to your new temporary home." "Dr. Hernandez mentioned you're the lead researcher," Chloe said, extending her hand. The handshake was firm but warm. "That's right, though I prefer you call me Ethan. We'll be living together for 6 months. It's better to keep things relaxed." His voice had a soft, refined accent that suggested a privileged education. As he spoke, Chloe noticed that his eyes didn't smile as much as his mouth, as if he carried some invisible weight. Ethan gave her a tour of the mansion that lasted almost an hour. The first floor included a stunning library with floor-to-ceiling books, a fully equipped kitchen that looked straight out of a magazine, a living room with a stone fireplace and huge windows overlooking the garden, and what he called "my office," a room he kept locked during the tour. "That will be your only restricted area," he explained. "Everything else is yours to explore." On the second floor were 6 bedrooms, each with a private bathroom and unique decor. "You can choose any one except the one at the end of the hall, which is mine," Ethan said. Chloe chose a room with a lake view, decorated in blue and white tones, with a king-size bed that looked more comfortable than any place she had ever slept. A carved wooden desk was positioned next to the window, perfect for studying if she decided to continue with her thesis during these months. "I'm curious," Chloe said as she unpacked. "Exactly what kind of behaviors will you be observing?" Ethan leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. "Basic social interactions, routine patterns, how two people adapt to sharing space. Nothing invasive, I promise. There will be a few sessions where I'll ask you questions about your experiences, your feelings about living together, that kind of stuff. If this mystery has you intrigued, hit the like button so we know you want more stories like this." That first night, they had dinner together in a formal dining room that seemed designed for 12 people but felt intimate with just the 2 of them. Ethan had prepared pasta with seafood sauce that, he admitted, he had learned to cook out of necessity when he moved out on his own. During dinner, Chloe noticed curious details. The family photographs she expected to see were conspicuously absent, replaced by abstract art and impersonal landscapes. When she mentioned the lack of personal photos, Ethan quickly changed the subject. "And if this mystery is starting to intrigue you as much as it intrigued Chloe, hit the like button so we know you want to continue hearing these disturbing details." "Tell me about your thesis," he said, pouring red wine into crystal glasses that probably cost more than her old apartment's monthly rent. "Childhood trauma and coping mechanisms in early adulthood," Chloe replied. "Specifically, how significant losses during adolescence affect subsequent interpersonal relationships." For a moment, she saw something flash across Ethan's eyes. Pain? Recognition? Before he smiled again. "Fascinating. I suppose your own experience with your parents' loss informs your academic perspective." The statement surprised her. She didn't remember mentioning that personal information in her application. "How did you know that?" she asked. Ethan took a sip of wine before replying. "Part of the selection process included basic background checks. I'm sorry if it feels invasive, but we needed to ensure our participants didn't have family commitments that would interfere with the experiment." After dinner, Ethan showed her the entertainment system in the main living room, a giant screen TV with access to every streaming platform imaginable, a movie collection that rivaled any blockbuster, and a sound system that made music sound like it was at a private concert. "The days can get long here," he explained. "I want to make sure you have everything you need to stay comfortable and entertained." Before she went to bed, Ethan handed her a tablet. "Each night I'd like you to complete a brief questionnaire about your day. Nothing complicated, just your general thoughts and feelings. It's part of the research protocol." The device already had her name programmed and a simple interface with basic questions. "How did you feel today? What activities did you do? Was there anything that made you uncomfortable or happy? How do you rate your interaction with the lead researcher?" That first night, as she filled out the questionnaire in the comfort of her new room, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than Ethan had explained. The questions were too personal for a simple behavioral study, and the mansion was too luxurious for a scientific lab. If you're already feeling the same unease as Chloe, hit the like button so we know you're connecting with this intense story. But with $500,000 already deposited in her bank account, more money than she had ever seen in her entire life, she decided to give this strange but lucrative adventure the benefit of the doubt. The routine that was established during the first 2 weeks was surprisingly normal, almost domestic. Chloe would wake up around 8, find breakfast already prepared in the kitchen, evidence that Ethan was an early riser, and spend her mornings reading in the library or walking through the extensive gardens. She dedicated her afternoons to writing her thesis, something she had put off for months due to financial stress, but which now flowed naturally in this serene environment. Ethan would disappear for several hours each day into his locked office, from which sounds occasionally emerged that Chloe couldn't fully identify. Sometimes it seemed like music, other times voices, and occasionally something that sounded like recorded crying. When she asked him about it, he explained that he was analyzing data from other experiments and that the sounds were recordings of previous therapeutic sessions that I'm transcribing. The explanation made sense from an academic perspective, but something about his way of avoiding eye contact while he spoke made Chloe's mind set off a small alarm. The experimental sessions Ethan conducted were strangely intimate for scientific research. Every afternoon at 4 they would sit in the main living room with tea, and he would ask her questions that seemed more appropriate for therapy than behavioral observation. How did you feel when you lost your parents? What do you think about trust in relationships? Do you have nightmares about the accident? Chloe answered honestly, finding it strangely cathartic to talk about subjects she had avoided for years. What unnerved her was that Ethan seemed genuinely interested in her answers, not like a scientist collecting data, but like someone seeking personal understanding. His own answers to her follow-up questions revealed snippets of personal information that didn't seem appropriate for a researcher-subject relationship. He mentioned having lost important people in the past, spoke of guilt for things you can't undo, and once during a conversation about forgiveness, his eyes filled with tears that he quickly wiped away. One afternoon, while Ethan was in his office, Chloe decided to explore the mansion more deeply. In the basement, she found a room that looked like a full gym, with state-of-the-art equipment and mirrors covering all the walls. But what caught her attention were the marks on one of the walls, holes that looked like they had been made by fists, and dark stains on the concrete that she hoped were from paint, but feared were dried blood. In a corner of the gym was a cardboard box labeled, "Photos do not open." Curiosity overcame her sense of privacy, and Chloe carefully opened it. Inside, she found dozens of family photographs, a younger, genuinely smiling Ethan, surrounded by what appeared to be his wife, a beautiful blonde woman, and 2 small children, a boy and a girl. The photos showed family vacations, birthdays, everyday moments of happiness that contrasted dramatically with the solitary Ethan she had met. The photo that impacted her most showed the entire family in what looked like this same mansion, but decorated completely differently, warm, lived in, full of children's toys, and evidence of family life. On the back of that photograph, someone had written in a shaky hand, "Before everything changed, Ethan, Clara, Sebastian, and Valentina, Christmas 2019. That date was significant. According to her calculations, it would be approximately 5 years ago. When she came up from the basement, she found Ethan waiting for her in the living room, with an expression she had never seen before. Not angry exactly, but intensely serious. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked, his voice strangely calm. Chloe felt like she had been caught doing something terrible, even though he had technically said that the whole house except his office was available to explore. Let me know in the comments if you've had a strange experience that made you question everything you thought you knew about someone. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy. The photos were in an open box and—" Ethan raised a hand to stop her. "Don't apologize. I suppose it was inevitable that you'd find them." He sat down heavily in one of the armchairs, suddenly looking much older than his apparent mid-30s. "You're probably wondering why a man with a family needs an experimental companion for 6 months. Where are they?" Chloe asked softly, sitting across from him. "Your wife and children?" The question hung in the air for a long moment, before Ethan answered with a single word that completely changed the atmosphere of the conversation. "Dead." The silence that followed was crushing. Chloe could hear her own heart beating as she processed that revelation. Everything was beginning to make sense in a terrible way. The mansion too big for one person, the absence of family photos, the therapeutic questions disguised as scientific research, the pain she had detected in his eyes since the first day. "The experiment," Ethan finally said, looking out the window toward the lake. "It's not exactly what they told you, is it?" It wasn't really a question, but an admission. Chloe felt the ground shift beneath her feet as she realized that the last few days, perhaps this entire situation, had been built on a fundamental lie. "Who are you really?" she asked, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "And more importantly, what do you really want from me?" Ethan finally looked at her directly, and in his green eyes she saw something that both terrified and intrigued her. Absolute desperation mixed with a fragile, dangerous hope. That night, Chloe couldn't sleep. Ethan's words echoed in her mind like echoes in an empty cave. Dead. A single word that explained everything and nothing all at once. She got up around 3 in the morning and walked silently through the mansion's halls, which now felt different, less like a temporary home and more like an elegant mausoleum filled with unresolved secrets. She decided she needed answers, and the only potential source was Ethan's forbidden office. She approached the door expecting to find it locked, but to her surprise the handle turned easily in her hand. The interior took her breath away. It wasn't a traditional office, but something that looked like a combination of a scientific lab and a personal sanctuary. The walls were covered with computer monitors displaying graphs, brain waves, and data she couldn't fully interpret. But what dominated the room was an entire wall dedicated to his lost family. Hundreds of photographs arranged chronologically, from wedding photos to the last moments captured before the tragedy. In the center, framed in gold, was a newspaper article with the headline, "Miller family dies in car accident. At-fault driver survives with minor injuries." Chloe read the entire article, her hands trembling as she processed the details. Ethan had been driving on a rainy December night in 2019, returning from a family holiday dinner. According to the report, he lost control of the vehicle on a dangerous curve, flipping it into a ravine. Clara, 32, Sebastian, 8, and Valentina, 5, died instantly. Ethan survived with a concussion, minor fractures, and what the article called severe psychological trauma. In one corner of the room was a workstation with equipment she recognized from her neuropsychology classes, brainwave monitors, biometric sensors, and what looked like advanced brain mapping technology. An open notebook on the desk contained handwritten notes in Ethan's handwriting, but the content confused and alarmed her. Day 847 post-accident. Medications aren't working. Traditional therapy has failed. I need an alternative. Day 923. Research on experimental therapy suggests the brain can process trauma through specific human interactions. The subject must have personal experience with similar loss. Ideal candidate. Young, orphaned, psychology student, no strong family connections to interfere. Day 961. Contact established with Chloe Miller. Perfect profile. Plan in motion. Note, she must not know the true nature of the experiment until she is fully integrated into the environment. Her presence must feel natural, not clinical. Chloe felt her legs give out as she grasped the magnitude of the manipulation. She wasn't a participant in a scientific experiment. She was an involuntary piece in the personal healing process of a man shattered by guilt and grief. All their intimate conversations, every moment of vulnerability she had shared, had been carefully orchestrated to serve his emotional recovery. She kept reading, discovering that Ethan had been monitoring her vital signs, sleep patterns, and emotional responses through hidden sensors in the house. Detailed graphs showed how her presence had affected his own mental stability, a decrease in nightmares, a reduction in panic episodes, a gradual increase in what he called moments of genuine peace. She was literally his living medicine. But what disturbed her most were the final pages of the notebook, which contained detailed plans for the next phases of the treatment. Ethan had designed specific scenarios to create deeper emotional bonds, situations that would make her emotionally dependent on him, fabricated crises that would require her to comfort him, and gradually what he called complete therapeutic transference, where she would assume the role of an emotional replacement for his lost family. In an open safe, she found legal documents that chilled her to the bone. Not only had he falsified the identity of Neural Tech Solutions, the company didn't actually exist, but he had also prepared documents to make her his legal beneficiary in case anything happened to him. The will, dated just 2 weeks after she arrived, left her his entire considerable fortune, including the mansion, with a single condition, that she remain there to continue the work of preserving the memory of the Miller family. A sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. She quickly closed the notebook and turned toward the door, but it was already too late. Ethan appeared in the doorway, dressed only in pajama pants. his hair disheveled from sleep, but his eyes wide awake. He didn't seem surprised to find her there. In fact, he looked almost relieved. And tell us in the comments where you're watching this story from, because we're so curious to know where in the world you're feeling this tension with us. You know everything now, he said simply, closing the door behind him. Honestly, I'm surprised it took you so long to snoop around here. Most people would have explored the forbidden office much earlier. His calmness was more unsettling than if he had been furious. If you're feeling the same tension as Chloe right now, share this video with someone else who loves psychological mysteries like this one. Has all of this been a lie? Chloe asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Since the very beginning. Ethan walked slowly closer, and she noticed his hands were trembling slightly, not from nervousness, but from what seemed to be anticipation. Not a lie, he said carefully. A simplified version of the truth. I do need help, you are helping me, and the money I paid you is completely real. The only difference is that the beneficiary of this experiment is me, not science in general. He sat on the edge of his desk, looking at her with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. So, what am I to you? Chloe asked. Your patient or your therapist? The smile that crossed Ethan's face was the most genuine she had seen since her arrival, but also the most terrifying. That, he said, is exactly the right question, and I think you already know the answer. Ethan went to one of the monitors and began typing, making the screens come alive with videos that Chloe immediately recognized as surveillance footage of the mansion. She could see herself at different moments over the last few weeks, reading in the library, walking in the garden, sleeping in her room. The invasion of privacy hit her like a physical slap, but before she could protest, Ethan spoke. I need you to see something, he said, his voice trembling in a way she hadn't heard before. Not the recordings of you. I only use those to monitor your well-being, I swear. I want to show you what really happened the night of the accident. He switched to another folder in the system, and the main screen showed what looked like the interior of a car, filmed from the dashboard. You installed a camera in your own car? Chloe asked, confused. Ethan shook his head. The police installed it after a previous incident. I had had some episodes of driving under the influence of anxiety medication. Clara had insisted on the monitoring as a condition for me to continue driving the kids. The video began to play, showing a younger, visibly happier Ethan behind the wheel. In the passenger seat, Clara, even more beautiful than the photographs suggested, was singing along to the radio while the children laughed in the back seat. The scene was one of perfect domestic happiness, so normal that it was heartbreaking to know how it would end. We were driving back from Clara's parents' house, Ethan narrated as the video continued. It was December 23rd. The kids were excited for Christmas. Clara had a little wine at dinner and was particularly affectionate. On the screen you could see Clara lean over to kiss Ethan's cheek as he drove, making him smile. But then, the atmosphere in the video changed. Ethan's phone began to ring, and Clara answered it for him using the car's hands-free system. The voice that came out of the speakers made the present-day Ethan close his eyes in pain. Ethan, this is Dr. Ramirez from the hospital. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to inform you that your father's test results came back. It's cancer, and it's more advanced than we thought. In the video, they could see how the news impacted the family. Clara took Ethan's hand as he continued to drive, whispering words of comfort. The children, who had sensed the gravity of the situation, fell silent in the back seat. The Ethan in the video was clearly shaken, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. I shouldn't have kept driving, the present-day Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. Clara offered to take the wheel, but I insisted I was fine, proud and idiotic to the end. On the screen, the phone conversation continued with devastating medical details. The cancer had spread. He had maybe 6 months. Treatment options were limited. Chloe could see exactly when everything went wrong. The Ethan in the video was so consumed by the news that he didn't notice the rain intensifying, didn't see the warning sign about the dangerous curve ahead. Clara was talking to him about calling her sister, making plans to help with the sick grandfather, when Ethan suddenly yelled, "Damn it!" as he realized they had taken the curve too fast. The rest happened in terrible slow motion, the car skidding on the wet asphalt, Clara screaming and trying to grab the wheel, the children crying in terror, and then the dry metallic impact as they flipped into the ravine. The camera continued to record for several minutes after the accident, capturing Ethan's moans of pain, his desperate attempts to wake Clara, his screams of, "Please, no, Clara, Sebastian, Valentina," until the emergency services arrived. Ethan stopped the video and remained still for several minutes, silent tears running down his face. "I've watched this recording 2,847 times, he finally said. "The police showed it to me as part of the investigation, to prove there was no alcohol or drugs involved, just stupid negligence on my part. They thought it would help me get closure. Instead, it became my obsession." "Ethan," Chloe began, but he raised a hand to stop her. "No," he said firmly. "You need to hear everything before you decide whether you're going to stay or call the police." He stood up and began pacing the room like a caged animal. "After the accident, I spent 8 months in different psychiatric hospitals. Trauma therapy, experimental medications, electroconvulsive therapy when everything else failed. Nothing worked. The doctors said I had developed what they called pathological survivor's guilt, combined with complex PTSD. When they finally released me, I came back to this house that had been our family home and almost immediately tried to kill myself, 3 times in 6 months. That's when I started researching non-traditional methods of psychological healing." He stopped in front of another screen and showed her academic articles about human interaction-assisted therapy, studies on how the presence of certain people can alter the brain chemistry of traumatized individuals. "I discovered that my brain responded positively only to a very specific type of person. Young women who had experienced traumatic parental loss, but who had managed to maintain a certain emotional stability. It was as if my broken mind could absorb their capacity for resilience, for continuing to function after a tragedy." The explanation sounded scientific, but Chloe could hear the underlying desperation. "How many women have you brought here before me?" she asked, although part of her didn't want to know the answer. "You're the first," Ethan said, and something in his tone convinced her he was telling the truth. "I spent 2 years designing the perfect experiment, creating the fake corporate identity, establishing the selection protocols. I only had one chance to get it right, because if I failed..." He didn't finish the sentence, but Chloe understood the implication. "The sensors in the house, the recordings, the constant monitoring," he continued. "It's all designed to measure my progress in real time. And Chloe, for the first time in 5 years, the indicators are showing genuine improvement. I'm sleeping more than 3 hours straight. I haven't had a panic attack in 2 weeks. Yesterday, for the first time since the accident, I woke up without immediately thinking of Clara and the kids. The confession hit her as a painful revelation. She really was helping him, but her own autonomy had been completely compromised in the process. She was effective as human medicine precisely because she didn't know that was what she was being." "And what about me?" Chloe asked. "In your great healing plan, what happens to me when you no longer need me?" It was the question she had been avoiding, but which now demanded a direct answer. Ethan looked at her with an expression that mixed gratitude, guilt, and something deeper that she couldn't fully identify. "That's the part I still haven't resolved," he admitted. "Because honestly, Chloe, I don't know if I'll ever be able to let you go." Ethan's words hung in the air like an implicit threat, although his tone had been more vulnerable than intimidating. Chloe felt her mind shift into analytical mode, all her years of studying psychology activating to assess the situation with clinical clarity instead of emotional panic. She was dealing with a brilliant man, devastated by trauma, who had orchestrated an elaborate form of self-therapy, using her as an involuntary instrument. "So I'm not your experimental participant," she said slowly. "I'm your unlicensed, non-consenting therapist." Ethan nodded, apparently relieved that she had articulated the reality so directly. "And the $500,000 I've already received, is that my fee for psychological services I didn't know I was providing? They are real, honestly earned, and yours no matter what you decide to do now," Ethan replied. "There was never any intention to deceive you financially. If you want to leave tomorrow, the money remains in your account, and you'll receive the other $500,000 as compensation for the unorthodox circumstances." Chloe was surprised by her own reaction. She didn't feel the panic she expected, but an intense professional curiosity. "Show me the data," she said. "If I'm going to be your accidental therapist, I want to see exactly how I'm affecting your recovery." Ethan seemed genuinely surprised by her response, but went to the computers with what looked like cautious hope. The screens filled with complex graphs showing sleep patterns, cortisol levels, heart rate, and something labeled episodes of abnormal neurological activity. All the indicators showed dramatic improvements since her arrival. "This red line," Ethan explained, pointing to a graph, "shows my nightly nightmares. Before you arrived, I had between 8-12 episodes per night. Now I'm averaging 2 to 3, and many nights I sleep completely without interruption." "And this," Chloe asked, pointing to another graph that showed regular spikes, followed by periods of normalcy. Daytime panic attacks. They used to last between 45 minutes and 2 hours, occurring 3 to 4 times a day. Now they're shorter, less frequent and... He paused. They only happen when you're out of the house for extended periods. It was an unsettling admission of dependency, but presented as scientific data. Chloe studied the graphs with a clinical eye, and what she saw disturbed her in a completely new way. Ethan, these patterns, they don't just show that I'm helping you, they show that you're becoming neurologically dependent on my presence. She pointed to a series of measurements. Look here, your dopamine and serotonin levels increase dramatically when I'm in your line of sight, and they fall precipitously when I'm not. I know, he said simply. That's why I'm not sure I can let you go. It's not just an emotional choice, it's physiological. My brain is now programmed to need you to function normally. The honesty of the admission was simultaneously refreshing and terrifying. That's not healing, Chloe said firmly. That's addiction. You've replaced one form of dysfunction with another. For the first time in the conversation, she saw a flicker of something darker in Ethan's eyes. Not anger, but something more primitive. Fear that she might be right. Maybe, he admitted, but it's an addiction that allows me to live instead of just surviving. Before you, every day was a battle not to kill myself. Now, for the first time in 5 years, I have moments of genuine happiness. Isn't that worth something? Even if it comes at the cost of... He trailed off. At the cost of what? Chloe pressed. Finish the sentence. At the cost of your freedom of choice, he finished silently. Because honestly, Chloe, I don't think I can survive if you decide to leave. And that means I can't really give you the option to leave, can I? The silence that followed was the most charged moment in all their interactions. Chloe realized that she had crossed an invisible line in the relationship. She was no longer a guest or even a patient, but something more complex and potentially dangerous. If you've been in a situation where you realized someone needed too much from you, leave a comment about how you handled that pressure. And what if I don't want to be your permanent emotional support system? She asked. What happens if I decide I want my own life back? And if this story is impacting you as much as it impacted those who investigated it, share it with someone else who also needs to hear about how people can emotionally manipulate us without our realizing it. Ethan was silent for several minutes, clearly struggling with the question. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me says I should let you go, that keeping you here against your will is wrong no matter the consequences for me. But another part, the part that has been drowning in guilt and pain for 5 years, says that my survival has to count for something too. So we're at a stalemate, Chloe said. You can't let me go and I can't stay knowing that I'm essentially being held as an involuntary therapeutic intervention. Not exactly, Ethan said, and something in his tone made her look at him more intently. There's another option, one that I've been considering since I started to get better, but it would require you to participate voluntarily, with full knowledge of what you're agreeing to. What kind of option? Ethan walked to another computer terminal and opened a file labeled Phase 2 Integration Protocol. What if, instead of fighting this dependency, we embrace it? What if we make this official? You become my licensed partner therapist, we publish research on our methods, and we transform what happened accidentally into something legitimately useful for other trauma survivors. The proposal was breathtaking in its audacity. You're suggesting I legitimize this entire situation by making it professional? I'm suggesting we transform an accident into innovation. Your therapeutic instincts are remarkable, Chloe. Even without formal training, you've helped me more than years of professional therapy. Imagine what you could achieve with proper resources and training. It was tempting and terrifying at the same time. And what if I say no? Ethan looked at her directly in the eyes. Then you are free to leave tomorrow with the full $1 million, and I will handle the consequences of my dependency as best I can. But I wanted you to know that there is another path available, one where we could both benefit instead of one of us paying the price for the other's well-being. Chloe spent the night sleepless, walking through the mansion as she processed Ethan's revelations and impossible proposal. In the library, she found clinical psychology books she hadn't noticed before, advanced texts on trauma therapy, studies on therapeutic codependency, and several academic articles with Ethan's name as a co-author. Apparently, before the accident, he had been a licensed psychologist specializing in family trauma, which explained his sophistication in designing the experiment. When she finally went down for breakfast around noon, she found Ethan in the kitchen making coffee with an obsessive precision he hadn't shown before. His hands were trembling slightly, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had slept as little as she had. "I need to ask you more questions," she said without preamble. "If we're going to consider any kind of ongoing arrangement, I need total honesty about everything. No more dramatic revelations, no more secrets discovered in forbidden rooms." Ethan nodded, pouring coffee into 2 mugs with movements that seemed carefully controlled. "Ask me anything. At this point, there's nothing you can't know." "The other women," Chloe began. "You said I was the first you had brought here, but not the first you had considered. How many other people did you research? And what happened to them?" Ethan sat across from her at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug as if he needed the warmth. "I researched 847 potential candidates over 2 years. Most weren't suitable for obvious reasons. Too young, too old, no relevant trauma history, existing family commitments. But there were 23 who met the initial criteria. And I contacted 12 of them through various pretexts. Academic surveys, volunteering opportunities, job interviews for fictional positions. 9 responded positively, but when I met them in person, I immediately knew it wouldn't work. It wasn't exact science, more like instinct. They were either too broken by their trauma or too completely healed. I needed someone at that perfect middle ground where they had processed the grief enough to function, but still carried enough pain to understand mine. Chloe felt disturbed by the calculated nature of his search. "So you were essentially auditioning people to be your involuntary therapist?" "Yes," he said simply. "And before you ask, none of the other candidates were harmed. Most thought they had participated in routine market research or academic surveys. 3 received job offers that ultimately didn't work out. No one else was brought to this house or subjected to anything like what you've experienced." "What made me different?" Ethan looked uncomfortable, as if he was admitting something he had hoped to keep private. "Your thesis," he said finally. "When I read your preliminary research on childhood trauma and adult coping, I recognized that you had developed personal insights that no textbook could teach. You're writing about patterns of grief, about how loss shapes but doesn't define a person's capacity for relationships. It was like reading my own thoughts written by someone more articulate than I had been. Also," he continued more quietly, "there was something in your photos, yes, I got photos through social media before making contact, that reminded me of Clara, not necessarily physically, but something in your expressions, a kind of warmth that persists despite the pain. It made me think I might be able to feel comfortable again, safe again, in a way that had nothing to do with romantic attraction and everything to do with simple human connection." The admission made Chloe deeply uncomfortable. "So I was selected partly because I reminded you of your dead wife?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "You were selected because your psychological profile suggested you could understand deep loss without being destroyed by it. The resemblance to Clara was an additional factor that made me think I might actually relax around you. That turned out to be true, but not in the way I expected." "Meaning?" Ethan paused, clearly struggling with something. "Meaning that somewhere during these weeks, my feelings toward you changed. Initially, your presence helped because it felt familiar, safe, reminiscent of what I'd lost. But now," he stopped. "Now what? Now you're not a replacement for Clara. You're you. And that's simultaneously better and worse for my recovery. Better because it means I'm capable of forming new attachments instead of just clinging to old ones. Worse because it means my dependency on you isn't just about trauma healing. It's about genuine affection that I have no right to feel." The confession hung in the air like a dangerous charge. Chloe realized that the situation had become even more complex. She was no longer just an accidental therapist, but the object of a man's genuine emotional affection, whose judgment had been compromised by years of trauma and isolation. "Ethan," she said carefully, "what you're describing sounds like extreme transference. You've projected your need for healing onto me, and now you're confusing gratitude and dependency with real affection. That's a textbook psychological phenomenon, not genuine feeling." "Maybe," he agreed, "but does that make it less real for me? Does the source of a feeling negate its impact?" He looked at her directly in the eyes. "Chloe, whether this is transference, dependency, or genuine affection, the result is the same. I've become emotionally attached to you in a way that goes far beyond therapeutic need, and that creates an ethical problem that I don't know how to solve." "What kind of ethical problem?" "The kind where I have to choose between my own mental health and your autonomy, because even if I offered you complete freedom to leave, even if it meant the collapse of my psychological progress, I would still hope you would choose to stay. And that hope feels like manipulation even when I'm trying to be completely honest. Chloe stood up abruptly, needing physical distance to process what she had heard. I need time to think, she said. This conversation, all this information, it's too much to process immediately. Of course, Ethan said, but Chloe, before you make any decision. He hesitated, then continued. There's one more thing you need to know. Something that changes the context of everything. She turned to him, fearing whatever revelation came next. My father died yesterday morning, at the hospital, where he had been receiving treatment for the cancer that precipitated our accident that night. I got the call while you were sleeping. The news hit her like a physical blow. Why didn't you tell me immediately? Because, Ethan said, tears forming in his eyes, for the first time since my family died, I had someone to grieve with, and I was afraid that if you understood that my emotional state might be compromised by a recent loss, you would feel obligated to stay out of pity rather than choice. I wanted your decision to be based on what we've built together, not on sympathy for my most recent tragedy. Looking at him now, vulnerable, honest, devastated by both old and new losses, Chloe realized that her decision on whether to stay or leave had become impossibly complicated by factors neither of them had anticipated. The news of Ethan's father's death changed the entire emotional balance of the situation. Chloe found herself in the garden that afternoon, sitting by the artificial lake, trying to separate her own feelings from the complex web of manipulation, genuine dependency, and real human grief she had uncovered. The water reflected the grey clouds that had gathered during the day, as if the weather were responding to the emotional weight of the revelations. Ethan found her there near dusk, carrying 2 mugs of hot tea and an expression that mixed hope with resignation. He sat several feet away, respecting her need for space while clearly struggling with his own need for proximity. Did you go to the funeral? Chloe asked without looking at him directly. There was no funeral to attend, Ethan replied. He had specifically requested immediate cremation, no ceremony. He said he didn't want anyone else to have to go through the pain of saying goodbye after watching him deteriorate. His voice cracked slightly. I think he was trying to protect me from more trauma, but honestly it made it worse. There was no closure, no chance for final words, just absence. Were you close to him before the accident? Yes and no, Ethan said, staring at the water. Before Clara and the children, he and I had a complicated relationship. He was demanding, a perfectionist, difficult to please. But after the accident, he became more supportive, more understanding. I think my grief helped him realize that life is too short for old resentments. He paused. Also, he was the only family I had left. Now I'm completely alone, except for me, Chloe finished. A person you hired to fix yourself and who you're now afraid to let go. When you put it like that, it sounds terrible, Ethan admitted, but also accurate. Chloe finally turned to look at him directly. Ethan, I need you to understand something. What you've done, the deception, the manipulation, even if it came from desperation rather than malice, has damaged my ability to trust my own judgment. For weeks, I thought I was genuinely connecting with someone, forming a natural friendship that was helping both of us. Now I know that every interaction was orchestrated, every conversation designed to serve your recovery. Not every conversation, Ethan protested. The late-night talks when we stayed up discussing books, when you told me about your childhood dreams, when we laughed about stupid movies we both love. Those weren't part of any protocol. Those were just human moments. But how can I know the difference? Chloe asked, frustration creeping into her voice. How can I distinguish between what was genuine and what was therapeutic manipulation when you yourself admit that you don't always know? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. You can't, he said finally, and that's probably the most honest answer I can give you. I've been so focused on my own healing that I didn't consider how disorienting this would be for you, how it would damage your own sense of reality and judgment. Do you understand that what you've done constitutes a form of psychological abuse? Chloe asked, her psychology training taking over. Even without malicious intent, you've created a situation where my autonomy, my ability to make informed decisions about my own life, has been completely compromised. Yes, Ethan said simply. I understand that. And I understand that no amount of desperation or good intentions excuses it. He stood up, setting down his untouched tea, which is why I'm prepared to face whatever consequences you think are appropriate. What does that mean exactly? It means, Ethan said, that if you want to call the police, report me for fraud or false imprisonment or whatever legal charges apply, I won't fight it. If you want to leave immediately and never see me again, I'll arrange transportation and you'll keep all the money. If you want to stay and help me figure out a way to continue this responsibly, with your full informed consent, we can discuss that too. And if I leave, what happens to you? Ethan looked out over the water, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. Honestly, I don't know if I'll survive it. Not necessarily physically, although that's possible, but emotionally, psychologically. For the first time in 5 years, I've experienced hope, moments of genuine happiness, the ability to imagine a future that isn't just about surviving one more day. I don't know if I can go back to who I was before. So you're saying that my decision doesn't just affect my own life, but potentially your survival. I'm saying that your decision affects both our lives significantly, but ultimately, you need to choose what's right for you, regardless of the consequences for me, because choosing to stay out of guilt or obligation would just be another form of coercion, wouldn't it? His insight surprised her. It was exactly what she had been thinking. Chloe stood up, feeling a restless energy that demanded movement. I need to know something else. In your research, in your careful selection process, did you ever consider what would happen to me? Whether participating in this experiment might affect my own psychological well-being, my ability to form trusting relationships in the future, my own recovery from trauma? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Ethan's silence was answer enough. You didn't, Chloe said. You were so focused on finding a cure for your own pain that you never considered whether you might be transferring some of that pain to me, whether making me an unwitting participant in your healing might damage my own psychological health. You're right, Ethan admitted, and I'm sorry, it's inexcusable. Sorry isn't enough, Chloe said, feeling anger rising for the first time since discovering the truth. Sorry is what you say when you accidentally bump into someone on the street. This was months of planning, elaborate deception, and ongoing manipulation of my emotions and my life. Sorry is completely inadequate. Ethan absorbed her anger without defending himself. What would be adequate? He asked quietly. I don't know, Chloe said honestly, but I know that whatever happens next, it needs to be completely on my terms, without any pressure or emotional manipulation from you. No more revelations designed to make me feel sorry for you. No more information released strategically to influence my decision. Agreed, Ethan said. What do you need from me? Space, Chloe said immediately. Physical and emotional space to process this without your presence affecting my thinking. And time, at least a week where we don't interact beyond basic necessity. Ethan nodded, though she could see the physical discomfort the suggestion caused him. Will you stay in the house during that week, or would you prefer to go somewhere else? I'll stay, Chloe decided. This place feels like mine now too, even if that feeling was artificially created. But you need to respect my space completely. No monitoring, no casual encounters, no attempts at conversation unless I initiate them. Understood, Ethan said. And after the week, Chloe said, we'll talk again, and then I'll make my decision about what happens next. She paused, looking at him directly. And Ethan, whatever I decide, you need to accept it without argument, without emotional appeals, and without trying to make me responsible for your well-being. Can you promise me that? Yes, Ethan said quietly. I promise. As darkness settled over the lake, both of them remained standing in the garden, physically close but emotionally separated by the vast distance of broken trust and an uncertain future. In this moment, Chloe realized that her decision would affect not just her own life, but potentially the entire trajectory of both their healing journeys, and perhaps determine whether redemption was possible when trust had been so completely shattered. The next 7 days passed with a torturous slowness. Chloe kept her promise to avoid unnecessary interactions with Ethan, but the mansion wasn't big enough to avoid him completely. She occasionally glimpsed him from her bedroom window, working in the garden with an obsessive intensity, or heard him moving around the house during the early morning hours when he probably couldn't sleep. During the day, Chloe immersed herself in academic research, using Ethan's library to study similar cases of therapeutic dependency, psychological manipulation, and recovery from deceptive relationships. What she discovered both unnerved and reassured her. Cases where victims of psychological manipulation had successfully recovered, but also cases where the damage had been permanent, affecting their ability to trust others for years. On the 4th day of their separation, Chloe found an envelope slid under her door. Inside was a letter from Ethan and what appeared to be legal documents. The letter was brief but detailed. Chloe, I don't want to violate your requested space, but there is legal information you need to have before making your final decision. The attached documents transfer complete ownership of this property to you, regardless of your decision to stay. They also include the establishment of a trust fund that guarantees your financial security for the rest of your life, again, with no attached conditions. I want you to know that you have real options, not just theoretical ones. E. The documents were genuine, prepared by a legal firm in Chicago, and requiring only her signature to activate. The gesture was impressive in its implications. Ethan was literally giving her everything he owned, removing any financial dependence that might influence her decision, but it also felt like another form of manipulation, an overwhelming gift designed to inspire guilt or obligation. On the 6th day, Chloe was reading in the library when she heard an unfamiliar sound from the direction of Ethan's office, something between sobbing and screaming, raw and animal-like. Every instinct told her to maintain their separation, but her training in crisis intervention overrode her personal boundaries. She found the office door open and Ethan on the floor, surrounded by scattered photographs of his family, hyperventilating and clawing at his chest like he couldn't breathe. "Ethan," Chloe said firmly, dropping to her knees beside him. "Look at me, you're having a panic attack. I need you to focus on my voice." He was clearly in the middle of what looked like his most severe episode since she'd arrived. His eyes were wild, unfocused, and he was making sounds of distress that suggested a complete psychological breakdown. She guided him through breathing exercises, speaking in a calm, professional voice, while she was internally alarmed by the intensity of his distress. It took 20 minutes to get him stabilized enough to sit up against the wall. When he could finally speak, his first words were, "I'm sorry, I didn't want you to see me like this. I've been trying to hold it together during your space week, but today was your father's birthday," Chloe said, having seen the date marked on one of the scattered photographs. "And the anniversary of your family's death is next week." She had been following these dates subconsciously, her psychology training making her aware of how significant dates affect trauma survivors. "I thought I could handle it," Ethan said weakly, "but being alone in the house, knowing you're deliberately avoiding me, combined with missing him and them, everything just collapsed." Looking at him now, vulnerable, broken, genuinely suffering, Chloe felt her professional objectivity struggling with personal compassion. "This is exactly what I feared," she said. "Your psychological dependency on me means that any separation triggers crises. That's not healthy for either of us." "I know," Ethan admitted, "but knowing it doesn't make it any less real." Chloe made a decision that surprised her. "Come," she said, helping him to his feet. "Let's do something different." She led him to the kitchen and began preparing tea, her movements deliberate and calming. "For the next hour, I'm going to function as your therapist, officially, consciously, with appropriate boundaries." "What does that mean?" "It means," Chloe said, sitting in the chair across from him, "that I'm going to help you process this panic attack and these anniversary feelings professionally, as I would with any client. But it also means you need to understand that this is work, not a personal relationship, and there are boundaries we both need to respect." For the next hour, Chloe guided Ethan through legitimate therapeutic techniques she had learned, but never practiced. Cognitive behavioral strategies for managing panic, mindfulness exercises for grounding during emotional overwhelm, and structured conversation about processing grief. To her surprise, she found herself naturally skilled at the therapeutic intervention, and more importantly, able to maintain a professional distance, even while helping someone she cared about. "You're remarkable at this," Ethan said when they were done. "I mean professionally remarkable. I've worked with dozens of therapists over the years, and your natural instincts are better than most licensed professionals I've encountered." "No," Chloe said firmly. "Don't turn this into praise or validation right now. This was therapeutic intervention during a crisis, nothing more." But privately, she had felt something click into place during that hour, a sense of purpose and competence that she hadn't experienced since before her parents' death. That evening, they ate dinner together for the first time in a week, but with completely different energy. Chloe maintained professional boundaries, while Ethan seemed more grounded, more present than she had seen him since learning the truth about their situation. "I've been thinking," Chloe said carefully, "about your proposition, about turning this into something legitimate and professional." Ethan looked up sharply, but didn't interrupt. "Not because I want to stay trapped in this situation, but because what happened today showed me something important." "What?" "That I actually am good at therapeutic work, naturally good, and that maybe what happened between us, despite being built on deception, has created something that could genuinely help other people if we approach it correctly. Ethan leaned forward slightly. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, Chloe said slowly, that there might be a way to transform this whole experience into something ethically sound and professionally valuable. But it would require completely restructuring our relationship, establishing legitimate professional protocols, and ensuring that my participation is truly voluntary rather than coerced by financial dependence or emotional manipulation. How would that work? You have the resources to fund legitimate research, Chloe said, and you obviously have first-hand experience with trauma that needs professional treatment. I have natural therapeutic skills that could be developed with proper training and supervision. What if we create a real study with appropriate ethical approval, external supervision, and published results, exploring innovative approaches to trauma therapy through peer counseling? The idea was taking shape even as she spoke it. You could go back to being a patient properly, with appropriate professional support. I could get accelerated training in trauma therapy techniques. And we could document whether this kind of intensive, residential therapeutic relationship actually has merit beyond your individual case. And personally, Ethan asked quietly, what about whatever we've developed between us? That gets compartmentalized, Chloe said firmly. The professional relationship and personal feelings have to be kept completely separate, which means any dependency you've developed needs to be addressed therapeutically, not enabled through continued proximity. Ethan was quiet for several minutes. So you're proposing that we legitimize this, but with you having all the control and me giving up any expectation of a personal relationship? I'm proposing, Chloe said, that we try to create something valuable from what was originally manipulative. But yes, it would mean that you accept professional help for your dependency issues, and that any personal feelings between us get addressed in therapy rather than acted upon. And if I can't separate those feelings, if the therapeutic relationship becomes just another form of our current codependency, then the experiment fails, Chloe said honestly, and we discontinue it. But Ethan, what we have now isn't sustainable anyway. Either we find a way to make it professionally appropriate, or I leave and you deal with the consequences. Those are really the only two options. Ethan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark garden. You're offering me a chance to keep you in my life, but only as a professional therapist, with all personal connections subordinated to therapeutic goals. I'm offering both of us a chance to turn a damaging situation into something potentially healing and valuable. For you, for me, and possibly for other trauma survivors who might benefit from research we could produce. And you'd be willing to do that? To stay here, work with me professionally despite everything I've put you through? Chloe considered the question carefully. I'd be willing to try it for 6 months, with external supervision and the ability to discontinue if it becomes unhealthy for either of us, but only if you can genuinely commit to treating it as legitimate therapeutic work, rather than a way to maintain our current dynamic under different labels. What would you need from me to make that possible? Complete transparency, Chloe said immediately. External therapeutic supervision for both of us, regular evaluation by independent professionals, and your commitment to addressing your dependency issues directly rather than just managing them through my presence. Ethan turned back toward her. And if during this 6-month period, I realize that my feelings for you are genuine rather than just therapeutic dependency, then you discuss that with your external therapist, Chloe said, not with me, because in a professional therapeutic relationship, those feelings become part of what we work on, not something we act on. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Ethan's phone ringing. He looked at the screen and frowned. It's Dr. Hernandez. She's never called directly before, he answered, putting it on speaker. Doctor. Ethan, I need to inform you that there have been some inquiries about your research project. Someone contacted the university asking about neural tech solutions and your experimental protocols. I think we may have a problem. Chloe and Ethan looked at each other with alarm. What kind of inquiries? Ethan asked. Legal ones. Someone is questioning the legitimacy of your setup. Maybe we should discuss this in person. After hanging up, both sat in silence, processing this new complication. So, Chloe said finally, it looks like our decision about how to proceed might be made for us. If there are legal complications coming, then we need to decide quickly, Ethan finished. Either we formalize this properly with legal documentation and professional oversight, or I leave, and you deal with whatever legal consequences come from what's already happened, Chloe said. They looked at each other across the table, both understanding that their conversation had suddenly become much more urgent than theoretical planning for the future. The next morning, Dr. Hernandez arrived at the mansion, accompanied by a man who introduced himself as Ethan's lawyer, an elegantly dressed individual with a grave expression who immediately made Chloe feel like she was being evaluated for potential legal problems. The meeting was held in the formal dining room, with documents scattered on the table, as evidence of an operation that had grown beyond the control of any of the participants. "The situation is delicate," the lawyer explained, addressing Chloe primarily. "Someone, we don't know who, has reported the experiment to the authorities as possible fraud or kidnapping. The specific questions suggest that whoever made the report has detailed information about the nature of your arrangement." He looked directly at Chloe. "Have you spoken to anyone about your situation here?" "No," Chloe answered honestly. "I haven't had contact with anyone outside this house for the past few weeks." But even as she said it, she realized there was a flaw in that statement. Her prolonged absence from her normal life might have aroused suspicion in people she knew. Dr. Hernandez intervened. "We have prepared documentation that retroactively legitimizes the experiment, including appropriate research protocols and informed consent agreements. But we need you both to sign these documents today to establish that everything has been consensual and professional from the beginning." Chloe examined the documents, immediately recognizing that they were an elaborate fiction designed to cover what had really occurred. "This is falsification of records," she said firmly. "You're asking me to lie about the actual circumstances of my participation." "We are asking," the lawyer said carefully, "that you document the natural evolution of your arrangement toward a legitimate professional collaboration. The specific details of how it began are less important than ensuring that it continues in a legal and ethical manner." "No," Chloe said, standing up. "I won't sign false documents to protect Ethan from the consequences of his decisions." She turned to him. "And if you really want to start something legitimate between us, professional or otherwise, it can't begin with more lies." Ethan had been silent throughout the conversation, but now he spoke. "She's right." He looked at Dr. Hernandez and the lawyer. "Cancel the fake documents. If there are legal investigations, we will face them with the truth." "Ethan," Dr. Hernandez said in a warning tone, "you could face serious charges. Fraud, false imprisonment, psychological manipulation." "Then I'll face those charges," Ethan interrupted. "Chloe, regardless of what you decide about our future, I'm not going to ask you to compromise your integrity to protect me from the consequences of what I did." The lawyer looked clearly frustrated. "Do you understand the implications? If you admit that the initial experiment was fraudulent, Ethan could go to prison. His entire professional career would be destroyed. And Chloe, you could be seen as either an accomplice or a victim, neither of which is a comfortable legal position." "We understand," Chloe said, "but I'd rather face the consequences of the truth than live with the complications of more lies." She looked directly at Ethan. "Are you sure about this? Because once we admit what really happened, there's no going back." "I'm sure," Ethan said. "Honestly, Chloe, I feel like I've spent 5 years running from the truth about the accident, and then I spent more months running from the truth about what I did to you. I'm tired of running." Dr. Hernandez and the lawyer exchanged worried glances before collecting their documents. "If that's your final decision," the lawyer said, "we strongly recommend that you both get separate legal representation immediately. And Ethan, you should prepare for the possibility that this ends with criminal charges." After they left, Chloe and Ethan were left alone in the dining room, surrounded by the silence that follows irreversible decisions. "So," Chloe said finally, "what do we do now?" "Now," Ethan said, "we wait to see what happens with the investigation. And in the meantime, we decide if we want to try to build something real from the pieces of what we accidentally created." "Are you sure you want to risk everything for the possibility of this working out between us?" Chloe asked. "Because honestly, I don't know if what I feel for you is real or if it's complex Stockholm syndrome." Ethan smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen since she discovered the truth. "I'm not sure of anything," he admitted, "but I know that for the first time in 5 years, when I think about the future, I don't just see survival, I see possibility. And if that comes with legal, emotional, or professional risk, it's worth it. And if it turns out we can't separate what's real from what was manipulation, then we'll find that out together," Ethan said, "with real therapists, professional supervision, and complete honesty about how complicated this is." Chloe went to the window, looking out at the garden where she had spent so many hours over the last few weeks processing revelations that changed her understanding of everything. "If we're going to try this," she said finally. "I need you to understand something. You can't buy me with mansions or money or grandiose gestures. If I choose to stay, if I choose to explore what we could be together, it has to be because I genuinely believe it's worth it, not because I feel obligated by circumstances you created." "I understand," Ethan said, "and you need real therapy. Not me functioning as your therapist, but professional help to process your trauma, your guilt, and your tendency to create controlling situations when you feel vulnerable." "I already made an appointment," Ethan said. "For tomorrow." Chloe turned to look at him, surprised. "Seriously?" "Seriously. I called this morning after our conversation last night. If we're going to try this, professionally or personally, I need to be in a healthier emotional place." For the first time since she discovered the truth about the experiment, Chloe felt something akin to genuine hope. "Okay," she said, "then here's my decision. I'm staying for 3 more months. Not as a participant in your experiment, not as your unauthorized therapist, but as someone who wants to see if what we accidentally built can become something real, intentionally." "And after 3 months?" "After 3 months, we reevaluate. If we're both in healthier places, if we've processed the initial manipulation, if what we feel for each other survives therapy and complete honesty, then maybe we have something worth continuing. And if not, then we part ways as adults who tried something difficult and it didn't work out," Chloe said. "But at least we will have tried it with integrity." Ethan walked over to her, stopping at a respectful distance. "Can I ask you something? Right now, this very moment, do you feel anything real for me? Or was everything you experienced a result of the manipulation?" Chloe considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I don't completely know. But I know that during these weeks, especially before I knew the truth, there were moments where I felt more connected to another human being than I had felt since my parents died. And I know that when I saw you have that panic attack yesterday, my instinct wasn't to run but to help you. Is that enough to start?" "It's enough to try," Chloe said. "But Ethan, if at any point during these 3 months I feel that you're trying to manipulate me again, or if you can't handle me setting boundaries, or if your emotional dependency becomes unhealthy again, you leave," Ethan finished. "I understand, and I will respect it." That night, they had dinner together again, but this time the conversation was different. They talked about logistics, how to structure the next 3 months, what kind of therapy each would seek, how they would handle the legal investigations that might be coming. But they also talked about smaller things, books they wanted to read, places they might visit if the legal circumstances allowed, the possibility of Chloe continuing her psychology education with a completely new perspective on trauma and recovery. When they went to sleep, Chloe felt for the first time since she had arrived at the mansion that she was making a genuinely free choice about her own life. She didn't know if what was between her and Ethan would survive the scrutiny of real therapy and complete honesty. She didn't know if they could build something healthy from such a complicated foundation, and she definitely didn't know how the potential legal complications would turn out. But as she fell asleep in the room that now truly felt like her own, Chloe realized that for the first time in years, perhaps since her parents' death, she felt curious about the future instead of just anxious about survival. And maybe, she thought, as consciousness faded, that curiosity was enough to start something new, something real, something that neither of them had planned, but that both of them could choose to create together. The story was ending, but not completely resolved. In 3 months there would be another conversation, another decision, another chance for 2 complicated people to decide if what they had found in each other was worth the risks of trying to build something genuine from an imperfect foundation. And for now, that open possibility felt like the exact ending they both needed.